right, guys, welcome back to the Progressive Rehab and Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rori Alter, head clinical coach here at Progressive Rehab and Strength, back with episode 2 of the new parent training series, which is a series of 3 episodes here with my lovely husband, clinical coach here at Progressive Rehab and Strength, professor in exercise science at Adelphi University, and physical therapist. We are both powerlifters, strength lifters, and parents of 2. And we intended to record all 3 of these episodes back to back in one shot, but in good old parent fashion, parent of young littles. It's been 2 months since we recorded the first episode. So here we are recording episode 2. And just like a little recap of the last episode, this is really the first episode of this series with John was really geared towards the dad or the non-breastfeeding, non-night caring parent. It is definitely different for different parents, depending on what role you play in the baby's life, how you guys divide up responsibilities, night responsibilities, daytime responsibilities, feeding responsibilities, breastfeeding versus breastfeeding, pumping versus formula feeding versus, mom's up all night, dad's up all night, you split night responsibilities, one gets more sleep, one gets less sleep, both get equal sleep. It's going to be different for every parent. So the last episode really gave the perspective from the parent who has less of the newborn or infant physical demands, if that makes sense. And we're going to now dive into strategies for both parents, really for anyone who is short on time. That's the cool thing about the programming that we do at PRS. Even though we're calling it kind of new parent programming, it really just applies to anyone who is in the sleep deprived, little time for yourself, little time for training category. And even it kind of falls under the category of someone who doesn't have a high tolerance for training stress. So training stress could be volume, it could be intensity, it could be the combination of both of those. So someone who just doesn't have the ability to recover very well between training sessions, and someone who doesn't have a lot of time in their schedule to actually have a ideal training session, the ideal programming for the ideal scenario for the person who has the ideal amount of recovery resources as well. So if that all makes sense, does that make sense, John?
Yeah, I think that's pretty well said. I mean, when you think about most of our clients, they really fall into this category. They're
Yeah.
people that have busy professional and family lives. And, the reality of the situation is that those sorts of things are going to affect your recovery. They're going to affect your ability to train maybe in the way that you would like to, ideally, in terms of frequency of sessions, length of your sessions, right? How many sets you're able to do for a given exercise, and that sort of thing. So we're talking about new parents here, but a lot of people fall into this category, whether you're a new parent or you have adolescent kids and just
Mm-hmm.
kind of a hectic busy professional life. The reality is that those things affect training, and I think the more accepting you are of that reality, the better off you're going to be in the long run, because you'll make appropriate adjustments to your program before you end up getting injured or just, stalling out and not making progress and that sort of thing for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah. And so I have an article that I wrote a really long time ago. It's called Progression Without Regression, and I'll link it in the show notes for you guys. And I wrote this for anyone who's following any type of program, because you really have to make changes to your, if you don't want to get hurt, if you don't want to stall, if you don't want to go backwards in your progress, if you want to have more time outside of training to do other things, or if you don't have a lot of time in your training sessions and you have to make the most of your training, then we have to adjust things before they start to go awry. So this article, Progression Without Regression, is really written for anyone. And I think in the article, I use like a make a change when these RPEs are kind of showing up. And we do that with all of our clients. Like we'll monitor the relative intensity of however you want to monitor the relative intensity, whether it's using rate of perceived exertion or reps in reserve, or just like, this is really hard, this looks like a grinder, like that you're taking 5-10 minute rests. You got to monitor your training and look at the intensity, the relative intensity, and make adjustments before things get bad. And that applies to anyone, whether you're injured, whether you're a new parent with sleep deprivation, whether you're a night shift worker, whether you're you just have like 1 hour to get your training in, whatever. um you have to make changes, otherwise things start to go south, and south could be anything. So that article is very applicable to anyone, even though it was kind of written for like the standard program with nothing going on. You can make those changes relative to your situation. So I'll link that article. And we do that with all of our clients. So like even though we're calling this new parent concepts kind of thing, these concepts are just what we apply to everyone. We might lower that ceiling of what's acceptable, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think when we're in this situation of either injured, sleep deprived, or new parent, um, we lower that ceiling for what we kind of allow, if that makes sense. So, we're going to dive into strategies, because one of the biggest things that new parents specifically have, most parents anyway, is very little time to train. So, we're going to talk about training adjustments or strategies that we can use to get in effective training in a short period of time. And John is very, very good at this. I am not. Um, and I think in the last episode, we kind of talked about how John was really set up before um, we had babies to be in this situation. And I really wasn't, which is fine. I come from highly competitive background. My training sessions would take 2.5, 3 hours. John's training sessions never took that long. I trained more days per week. John really never trained more than 3 days per week. So for him, it was like this easy adjustment. For me, it's this huge like mindset adjustment. Like I want to be training 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 to 5 days a week. And so like adjusting my mindset to that has been challenging, and we'll talk about that probably towards the end of this episode. But John has been set up beforehand. So again, like we mentioned this in the last episode, if you're thinking about having kids, start to get yourself into this habitual training mindset of less is more, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about some strategies to train in a time efficient manner. John, what are the first things that you would recommend someone modify or consider if they have less time than they are used to train?
Yeah. Well, the two things that I um, typically look at first with people is to eliminate the majority of like the sets across programming that they're doing. Because like if you're doing a 5 by 5, and you're resting 5 minutes in between each of those sets, you're looking at, with including warm-ups, probably a minimum of, you know 40 to 45 minutes just to get through one exercise, right? So um for most people, that just at a certain point is not very practical, especially if you have like young kids, right? So one of the first adjustments I'll make for people is to move towards either like ascending sets of 5, right? Because that's a way that you can still accumulate a little bit of volume. It helps to ensure that you're really well warmed up before you get to your top set, which is, important if you're training, in a bit of a, time restricted fashion. So essentially, you're just doing, five progressively heavy sets of five up to a top set rather than sets across, right? So that's one thing that I'll do for some people, or I'll just have them do a top set with back offs, right? So as opposed to doing, multiple sets across at the same load, they work up to a top set. They could probably get through the warm ups faster because, unlike the ascending 5x5s, right, you're just tapering the warm up reps
Mhm.
like you normally would. You hit your top set, and then you can do, I usually don't have them do more than two back off sets, and sometimes even just one in for some exercises, depending on how they respond. And that a lot of times is at a load reduction that allows them to do, maybe a little bit more reps so that they get in a little bit of volume, with the back off stuff. So both of those are really helpful in just still allowing you to get a good training stimulus, still allowing you to lift heavy weights, but reducing the time that it takes to, get through your exercises in the gym.
Yeah, just to kind of give reference to this. So do like one lift. I mean, you do one lift also, but like I look at my watch, like I time my training sessions, and if if I'm taking more than 20 minutes to get to that top set for that one lift, like it's too long for me. Like I
Hmm.
should be at my top set by like 15 minutes max. Like I should be done with my main lift by like 20-22 minutes. And that gives you more time. I mean, I have different, like we have slightly different strategies for what we're training, but that gives me more time to like do a little bit of accessory and, not feel stressed or drop the accessory. Like if I can get my main lift done in 20 minutes, I know that anytime I feel like I don't have time for my workout, I do have time for my workout and I'll modify. One thing we can do is like we'll talk about timing rests, but we time rests and I'll modify my workout so that I will make changes to my rep scheme so that I keep the relative intensity lower so that I can keep my main lifts under 20 minutes. Because that will reduce my stress and improve my mindset when it comes to my training sessions. Um, and you did mention like five ramping sets of five, but for anyone who's listening, it doesn't have to be fives. It can really be like whatever. It could be threes. It could be whatever you're doing. Six it.
Oh yeah,
He was
for
just,
sure.
yeah.
That's just kind of so that, you know, um, is just kind of a alteration of like the 5x5 or
Mhm,
3x5 that,
mhm.
so many people that probably listen to this, kind of base their programming around. But really, whatever rep scheme you're doing,
Right.
you can modify the sets across to just do, and sometimes I'll have people do like 3 to 5 ascending sets, right? At
Mhm.
whatever rep scheme, just to give them a little bit of flexibility, based on the time they have available, how heavy they're going. Some exercises, if they're like lighter, like they don't need as many preparatory sets to get to their top set. So it just
Right.
depends. But it's just a nice way to like make the program a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, and then one strategy that you have implemented, which I recently started implementing with some of my clients after talking to you about it, is the number of back offs that you're doing. So you can be flexible in how many sets you're doing. If you're doing back off sets, you can do like 1 to 3, just depending on how much time you have, how recovered you feel, how good you feel after that first back off set. Um, and one thing that like we really recommend is not doing too many super heavy sets because you're not going to be able to recover if you've got babies waking you up at night, you got little sleep and you have to work, and you're rushing your training session, like you don't want to do too many heavy, like super heavy sets. One, because it will extend the training session because you have to recover, you have to rest longer between sets. And two, it takes more time to recover between training sessions. So we really only recommend like one heavy set, and then the rest should be kind of in that like moderate range. Um, yeah. So
And the thing to kind of get across to people, because sometimes when I present this sort of methodology, right, to a client, and typically when people are coming to us, it's either because they're injured or they're not making progress or that sort of thing, right? And you kind of talk to them about their situation. Um, and people kind of scoff at it like, oh, like, that's just not enough. But the reality is like what's enough is what you're able to recover from and make progress with, right? So like if what you're doing now is not working, more than likely it's because you're not recovering from what you're doing, right? So, people are a lot of times surprised that when they do less, they actually start to make progress, and even though this isn't what people are typically promoting on social media, about training and, everybody's like so focused on doing more volume and, I have to do more volume over time. Like the reality for the average lifter who's, again, like a busy professional with a family and things like that is that your recovery is not the same as that person that you're, you know, we're listening to on social media talking about like doing 20 sets per body part, per week. Like, it's just like it's not feasible for most people. And, as long as, like you said, you're hitting, your main lifts heavy enough and you're training in a progressive manner and you're able to recover from that, then you're going to make progress, even if it's with something as little as maybe one heavy set, right? And then, a few more moderate kind of back offs or preparatory sets as you're working up to it. Um, so people are a lot of times, if they give it a try, they're surprised that they can make progress with less, and it's kind of
hmm
eye opening to them.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So how can we set up our training week? And we talked a little bit about this in the last episode, but I kind of want to dive into it a little bit more. How
Mhm.
can we set up our training week? What are some different training week strategies that we can use?
Well, I think the key with this is to be flexible, to an extent, and um, there are really two different options that you have, right? One would be kind of less frequent but somewhat longer, more like full body training sessions, and typically people in this scenario, I would say like if they could do two like full body training sessions per week, that would probably work well. They'd be able to make progress and do just fine with that, right? And that's something like you mentioned how I was kind of set up like for a long time, like I really only trained twice per week, full body sessions. They would take me like an hour and a half, Um, but then once we had kids, like I had to kind of adjust from that, but I did hit, I was competing in powerlifting. Like I hit my all time best total in powerlifting, only training twice per week, so like it is possible again to make progress with less. Like you have to just be realistic about your situation. At the time I was working, probably 80 hours a week and sleeping
Literally.
like
There are some people who think they work 80 hours per week, but John actually worked 80 hours per week.
and sleeping 5 to 6 hours a night, so it was like twice a week was plenty for me,
You were
um
also, and I want to point this out because as we're talking, it's like I have a theory about this. You were also younger.
yeah,
So
no.
I think I want to point out, and I think that this is the case because I have worked with a lot of my clients I've been working with for a very long time. So I've watched them transition over the course of maybe like 6 to 10 years. Um, and I think one thing that with that type of training strategy, so maybe if you're like the younger new parent, that might work okay. Because I do find, and you'll have to tweak this based on what you experiment with and see how you feel. But some people with the twice per week full body training sessions, it's not enough exposure, and they kind of get this like, I don't want to say detraining between training sessions, but it's like a too much of a stress to their system every training session because there's maybe like 2 to 3, 4 days between training sessions, and the longer we get between training sessions, the like ickier you feel, if that makes sense. So, like, a couple of my clients will complain of like back pain if they're on this full body twice per week session. And if you're starting to feel that, or you notice that like you don't feel good in those types of training sessions, that you might just need to move more regularly, and going to this next strategy would be the appropriate thing for you.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, a lot of this stuff is kind of individualized, right? So the twice a week definitely worked well for me at that time, right? But things change over time, and you have to make adjustments based on your response to things, obviously, right? But so once we had kids, you know, what I found worked kind of better, because just having like a solid hour and a half, to train was just not really feasible most days, right? So it was like, how do I get my training in a shorter period of time consistently? So it was kind of increasing the frequency, but doing shorter sessions, right? So that could be as little as one main lift per session. And that's actually what I've been doing, over the last couple of years. Um, Pretty much exclusively, right? Is like hitting one main lift, kind of more frequently throughout the week, and that gives you some more flexibility, But like you could have your program set up so that on some weeks, maybe you're doing more of a full body, or maybe you're doing two lifts in a day, right? You have to look at your schedule and see, okay, I have a little bit more time on this day and less time on other days, so like after our son was born, um I basically initially tried to kind of stick to that 2 days a week, but then I just realized, like, you know what? I only have, like, to your point before, I have like a half hour. Like, I can get in like one main lift right now, and then later in the week, I'll get those other lifts in, and it just kind of evolved into kind of shorter, but like more frequent training sessions.
Yeah, and
Um,
I want to just add my own personal experience here, because between the last time we recorded for this little mini series and today, um like, it's funny because when I was editing the last episode, I was like, "Oh my god, I sound like I'm complaining so much and I'm making so many excuses." And to some extent, shut up. I
Tr Trent, keep that in, okay?
Yeah, keep that in,
Yeah,
Trent. Don't edit
keep
that
that
one.
in.
Don't edit
Don't
that
edit
out.
that out. Yeah, that was good.
um no, I mean, listen, there's so many things involved with me. Like, I have a lot of health issues. Just saw a neurologist for the first time to deal with migraines. Um, we don't have to go into my health issues.
A lot of health
A
issues.
lot
Just
of
so
health
a
issues.
lot. It's a lot. It's
It's
extensive.
fine. It's fine. But you
Too
want to know
too
what?
long for this podcast. We
Do you
can't
want to
go
know
into it
what?
all.
Do you want to know what? To the point of health issues,
Mhm.
I've had all of these health issues since before I had kids. And when I had enough time to recover and train with good sleep and like no child responsibilities, I competed at an international level. So they health issues can be excuses, but they might not be excuses when you have enough time to recover. And I think that is the biggest point that we have to get across here, because when we look at the stress recovery adaptation process for getting stronger and making progress, you don't just get stronger by being in the gym. You get stronger by having the ability to recover from that training stress and force the adaptation. So, currently, as a new parent, I do not have that enough time to recover between my health issues and producing breast milk and pumping and breastfeeding. And like last night, like this morning, you were like, "Oh, how many times did you get, like, how many times did Maddie nurse?" And I was like, "Oh, at like three. I just decided to stay in her room because I had slept for like 8 hours at that point." And you're like, "No, you were in the room when JD came in after he went to the bathroom." And I was like, "I was." So like I had like multiple sleep disturbances last night. I don't even remember because it's just chronic. But anyway, um but between the last time we recorded about this topic and this time, I modified my training. I was trying to do three main lifts in a training session. I was trying to go 3 days a week. And the mindset that I had, and it's funny because I talk about mindset with my clients all the
Mhm.
time, and even coaches need coaches, like we have sometimes it just takes us a minute to realize for ourselves. Um, it was too much for me to recover from. I basically was like going, and even though the loads didn't feel heavy, there were like things I could do easily. Every set looked pretty easy. Just like going into the gym for an hour and a half, I was like shot after every training session, and I would not get work done the rest of the day. I wouldn't want to train for like 3 4 more days, and then there would always be like an excuse. I don't have an hour and a half to train. I'm too tired from my last training session. I'm too tired from my last training session and waking up 3 times last night. So like it would just be like a week between every training session, and that wasn't working for me. So what we did, I don't know, it was on Valentine's Day. I was like, "Here's what I think I'm going to do for my training." And you're like, "Duh."
So basically, just so for people listening,
Oh,
what she's
John's right. He
trying to
just wants me to
say,
say that John was
what
right.
she's trying to say in a very drawn out way is that she finally decided to listen to me, and now things are going great. So,
I got 3 training sessions in
I'm
last week.
I'm very satisfied with this. This
Well,
podcast is going great.
so, but this is something that I do with my clients, and I'll give you an example of my client TJ. Love him, also a professor. Um, he has older kids. He's probably like a few years older than us, maybe like 5, 6, 7 years older than us. He's got a kid in college and a kid in high school, and like football, like he coaches football. He like his wife is a veterinarian, so and he works from home as a professor. So, and this is very true for when one parent works outside the house and one parent works from home. Doesn't matter if you're like the dad or the mom, the responsibilities often, I would say the majority of the time, fall on the parent working from home. So TJ works from home. The transportation responsibilities fall on him. Like getting the house ready for guests falls on him. And he, always they also have like a farm. They've got horses, and he's always like shoveling hay and like moving things that I don't know. It's crazy. It's wild where he lives. Literally, it's wild. So we were doing like two. At first, we were on like a 3-day program, like before things got crazy with his kid in high school. Like his kid was in middle school, it was a little bit easier. Then once kid got to high school, it became crazier. So then we went from 3 days to 2 days. I was like, listen, just all you got to do is get 2 days in. Worked for a while. Then it started to be like a week and a half between training sessions. And I was like, listen, we're just going to go one lift a day. Okay. Started to work. And then I was like, all right, TJ, we're falling out of this again. What can we do? I was like, you need to wake up every day at this time and get your training in before your day starts. And he was doing really good for a while. Then that fell out. And I was like, listen, just get whatever you can. If you have time to get 2 lifts, I'm going to write it as a 5-day training week. If you have time to do 2 lifts, do 2 lifts. If you have time to only do 1 lift, do 1 lift. Get the next time, get to like catch up somehow, And that's kind of what happened with me last week. I got 3 days in. I started on Tuesday because I didn't write my program till Tuesday morning. Should have started on Monday, but that's besides the point. Started on Tuesday, didn't have time to get my 4th lift in. So today I'm gonna do my 4th lift from last week and my 1st lift from this week. And it'll be enough because it's light. And each lift takes about 20 minutes. And my workouts last week took 45 minutes because I added accessory in. And the reason I added accessory in is because I also desired an element of variability and excitement and something to like get my heart rate up and get me excited to get into the gym other than just like 1 lift. For me, 1 lift right now feels a little boring. And I just needed like a little bit more of an escape. So I added an accessory. And it went really well. I got everything in for all my training sessions in 45 minutes to the dot for each session. I was actually impressed with myself for writing that program that took 40, every single session took 40 minutes. I was proud of myself. But it's to the element of flexibility. If you miss a lift, you can add it on, or you can just start your next week with the lift that you missed. There's no and we do this a lot with our clients where we'll write a training week over like 10 days instead of 7 days. It does not matter when you get your lifts in. Your lifts don't have to start on Monday. Your week doesn't have to be Sunday to Saturday. Just roll with it. It's like a rolling program. Just do the lift, do the session. Like, who cares if it's on a Sunday to Saturday or Tuesday to, who cares? Just do it, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, a couple of things you said there. One, like talking about the health issues that you deal with and how you still achieve like such a high level in powerlifting. But at that time, you had the ability to recover from those longer, more stressful sessions just because our life in general was less hectic and kind of just revolved around our training, right? Like,
Yeah.
so
Those were our
things are
dates. Like,
different.
we would just
Yeah.
train together, and like, I miss those days.
So, um, so really to just like kind of again hammer home the point that it is all about like recovery and like the people that are probably going to listen to this, like obviously there is a small percentage of people that start training that like don't make progress because they're really just not working hard enough. They're not pushing themselves. Like they just don't know really how to do that and don't have a frame of reference for that. But I think the majority of people that like listen to podcasts like this and that have been training for a while, it's really the opposite, right? Like they push themselves when they're in the gym and push themselves pretty hard, but it's like the stuff outside of the gym that kind of limits their progress,
Mhm.
right? Consistency with nutrition and sleep and things like that. So that's where again kind of emphasizing that recovery I think is so important, and the flexibility in training, like something that I do with a lot of clients that works really well is a 4-day training split, kind of like to your point, but spread out over just 3 days per week, right? So it's like they go lower body, lower body, and then the next week's upper body, lower body, upper body. So they're still doing that 4-day split, but they're spreading it out over a little bit over a week period of time, and that makes each week a little bit variable in terms of the training stress. It gives them more time to recover, and that works really well for a lot of people. So
Mhm.
um,
And
you know,
we can apply novice training principles to this as well. So, one thing is like, okay, you might be starting barbell training during this phase of your life. And maybe for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, it's easy because honestly, it's easy in the beginning, you know? And you might be able to get your squat bench deadlift in, squat overhead press deadlift in 3 days per week, no problem, in an hour, whatever. You might be able to get in and out. But you can apply, like, you don't have to do your novice linear progression as the ABA workouts, squat, bench, deadlift. You can just do your squat, your dead, like, then your bench the next day, then your deadlift the next day, then your overhead press. It's just getting it in is a win in this phase of your life. So I think that there's a lot of this mindset with the starting strength community that it has to be that way, or you just don't do it, or it's like not like you have to grind that into the ground no matter your situation. And it's not the case. Like, all these things have to be applied and modified to what you can recover from and what you have available in your schedule. So if you are a new lifter, or if you took time off, like, and that's what I was kind of dealing with, like, I was like, oh, well, like, I didn't train my whole pregnancy because I was so sick, and like, oh, so I should just start with the novice linear progression, and I did, and it was just too much for me. So then even I was trying to do that over and over and over again and failing to maintain consistency. So I split it up. I'm still making novice gains, and you can always make novice gains whenever you start a new program. So even if you've been lifting for 6 years, if you tweak your program, you're going to have slightly novice gains for a little bit, for a tiny little bit of time. So, I mean, we use linear progression with most of our clients, no matter where they are in their training.
well, I think when you're talking about like the novice progression, it's really about the frequency of the increase
Ex-
in loading,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like, so yeah, I mean, I do think that for novices, like the full body 3 times per week works great. But even within that context, like, could you use the ascending sets or top sets only? Like,
Mhm.
yeah, you can do that, and it maybe will it work as well as sets across? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the scenario. But like, the the key component is that you're asking yourself to go up in weight every single time you train, right? For as long as you can.
And that you're
For
consistent.
right.
You
And
know,
then
like if you're not going into the gym for 2 weeks because you don't have time for a full body training session, you
right.
know?
Consistency is obviously the key. But um, a more advanced program, the only real difference is how frequently are you requiring a load increase,
Right.
but to your point, like, I mean, I have a lot of like intermediate and advanced lifters that are still running fairly linear types
Mhm.
of programming, but maybe that's like in the form of weekly increases, right? For
Right.
someone that's more like
Mhm.
newly intermediate, to someone who's more advanced, and it's like block programming where we do a month of fives and then a month of
Mhm.
threes and then a month of
Mhm.
singles, but
Mhm.
it's still really just a linear increase in loading over that period of time, and then
Mhm.
we cycle back and try and
Mhm.
do a little bit more. Um so I do think that kind of that loading strategy, kind of always going back to that somewhat linear,
Mhm.
approach, just helps to keep things simple for people, right? And when you're pressed for time, like, you don't want to have to be doing these like overly complex, programs that just take more time and energy just to plan out and figure out, you know.
So let's talk, speaking of time, let's talk about efficiency within training sessions, because I think that a lot of people, like, we're talking about how to set up the training week
Mhm.
essentially, but you know, w- someone could execute a training session, the same training session, and it could take longer than someone else executing a training session. So, what are some things that we can do within a training session to keep the total time of the training session um, in in an acceptable range for the person who's executing the training session?
Yeah, well, I think a few things we kind of touched on a little bit already, but one, like timing your rest intervals, I think is super helpful, because you just sometimes you just don't realize like how long you're taking in between your sets. Now, there are certainly people that fall into the category of like not resting enough, so even for them it's helpful, right? Like,
Hmm.
if you tell somebody 3 minutes, like, and they want to do their next set like a minute and a half later, like that's not ideal also. But
See
for
those people
someone,
like
yeah,
Jerry and
but
like, let's go.
yeah, but those are also people that tend to be like earlier on in their training where their sets are
Hmm.
not super stressful,
Right.
right? When your sets get hard, like, you tend to kind of take more
Want the
time rather
rest,
than
yeah.
less. Yeah. And if you're like scrolling on your phone in between your sets, like all of a sudden it's like 7, 8 minutes as opposed to maybe the 3 to 5 that you were planning.
Hmm.
Well, if you're doing that on multiple sets throughout a workout, that's like a lot of wasted time, right? So timing your rest intervals between your sets, I think, is super helpful. Um, the some other stuff that you can do now. Some of this is a little bit more feasible, like if you have a home gym versus like
Mhm.
training in a commercial
Mhm.
setting, but um, kind of like overlapping lifts, like you're going through your squat, and in between your sets while you're resting on your squat, you're like warming up your bench or your press or like
Mhm.
whatever other exercise you may be doing that day. Um,
Well, so
and that,
I wanna add for that.
mhm,
So, one thing I think is really good, and I think that almost every single person I know who, like, is efficient with their training has some sort of timer, whether they're using their phone, their watch, or, like, literally has a timer just for timing their rests.
mhm.
Good old Nick D'Agostino with his timer that falls all over the
His
place.
kitchen timer.
His kitchen timer, it's like magnetized and it sticks on the rack, and then when he racks his lift, it always falls to the ground. Um, so timing your lifts, but if you are timing your rest, but if you are overlapping your warm up sets for the next lift with your work sets of the current lift that you're on. So the way that I will do that is I'll go straight from the work set into the warm up of the next one, and then I will start my timer after I finish the warm up of the next one, just so that you have that recovery. So you're not warming up during the rest period. Your rest period starts after the warm up, which starts after the work set, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there are different ways that you could do it. I've also in the past, like, let's say if I would be taking 3 minutes in between my
Hmm.
sets of an exercise, So I would time 2 minutes, do the warm up, and then another 2 minutes, right? So like I'm still being a little bit more time efficient because I'm
Mhm.
getting something
Mhm,
done that I
mhm.
wouldn't, and giving myself like an extra minute in total before
Right.
I do like my next set, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
so
mean,
yeah,
there's different ways to do it, but you just wanna make sure that you're getting that rest.
yeah.
You're actually getting, like, rest when
And
you're
just obviously that's harder to do in a commercial gym, right?
right.
Because you need multiple, access to multiple pieces of equipment, and depending on how busy the gym is, that would be harder to do. But
Yeah.
for anybody, whether you're in a commercial gym or training at home, like timing your rests, I think is very helpful.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, like, and I don't know if you do this so much, loading Tetris. I love this. This is, like, my favorite game. I will never put plates even at the end of the training session, I don't put plates away. I know, John.
It
I just
is
leave my deadlift bar loaded. It's fine, whatever.
no, it is
But
it is. Let me just tell everybody why it's not fine, because then I have to clean it up when I go into the gym. And we're talking all about time efficiency. It's
well, okay.
super
To
super time efficient for Rory to leave all of her training crap out so that
No, it's not
I
that bad,
clean
guys.
it up. No,
I just
it
leave
is
the blue the big plate on the deadlift bar. But
no,
also, listen, I
that
have
is
been asking for
that is a
time
lie.
efficiency. For
A
time
lie.
efficiency, I have been asking you not to put the barbells back on the wall and leave one barbell in each rack, because then I have to take them out
Yeah,
and put them on
yeah.
the rack. That's time efficient. It's the same thing as having to
No,
take my plates off the bar.
totally erroneous and false. We should put a
No.
you should put a poll on this podcast. What takes longer to unload a loaded deadlift
No, no,
bar,
no, no, no.
which which
He's
she
talking about
which
it
she
being
leaves,
no, no,
which
no,
she
no. No, no,
don't
no.
inter
It's
don't
one plate. It's one
no,
plate.
false. If I go into the gym right now, how many plates are on there? There's
Probably one
nope,
or
you are
none.
wroong. No, no,
What's
no,
on
no,
there
no,
right now?
no.
Oh, a green and
There's
a
80
blue.
kilos. There are 80 kilos
Oh,
on the
two
bar
plates.
of
Boo hoo.
okay.
You're going to use
Last
those
week,
plates anyway. You're
no,
going to use those plates anyway.
that is not true. That is not true. And we can't
Well,
just
actually,
leave we can't
who's
we
going into
can't
the gym next? I am. And I'm going to use those plates.
right in this instance, but is that
Okay.
always the case? The
Not always.
answer, of course,
Anyway,
is
okay, guys.
no.
All right, I'm putting this out there. I would really like John to leave the bars in the rack so
Okay.
that I don't have
But
to get
why
them
why
out.
can't
And
why can't we do that? Because we don't use the bars at the same height. So why does it make sense to leave them in the rack?
because I don't want to have to carry it all the way and move it over. Like,
Oh my goodness. Oh my
okay, all
goodness.
right, fine. You have okay. This is like the dishwasher. He doesn't
This
like how
no.
I load the dishwasher.
Oh my
Okay,
god.
I had a dishwasher my whole life. I've been loading a dishwasher efficiently my whole life. He never had a dishwasher.
I would like to interject. Rory has not loaded a dishwasher in 15 years since we've been together, because
That is
I
absolutely
do it
not
because
true.
I
That
do
is
it.
absolutely
I
not
do
true.
it every
Listen, when I
day
try to load the dishwasher, you move things around.
because it's like a wild animal
No, it's not. I'm
just
very neat. No, no,
randomly
no.
dumps
And
things in
then,
there.
okay, so who makes the bed in the morning? We both do, but who makes it nicely? I do. Who makes it like a mayhem, like wild, wild west? Like doesn't tuck the sheets in, doesn't even open the blind like curtains. Like it's like, why'd you even make the bed?
We are getting very off track here. Very
Okay,
off track.
so
The
let's just
point
come
is
to a time efficient
when
agreement.
no,
Shush. Let's just come to a time efficient agreement. I'll put the deadlift plates away if you leave the bars in the rack.
no, this
Okay,
is
then
what
I'm
this
just
is.
going to leave them there.
When you leave the gym, it should be as if you weren't there. Everything should be back in
In a
its original
commercial
place.
gym, in a
In its
commercial
original
gym,
place.
in a commercial gym, there is always a bar in every rack. Leave the bars in the rack. Thank you. You can't
No, no,
no,
I refuse.
then you
Uh,
can't use my gym anymore.
when I
You can't use my
when
gym
I am
anymore.
done training, I
You can't
put
use my gym
everything
anymore.
away. I put everything away so that it was like I wasn't even there. The place looks pristine
It doesn't
after I
matter. Leave
train.
the bars in the rack. Why
Pristine.
does it matter to you? Why does it matter? I want the bars in the rack.
Because you're just gonna have to adjust the heights of the bars
So
anyway.
what? I don't want to have to take it in and out of the rack, carry it to the wall, carry it back. Like, just leave them. I don't
All
care if
right.
I have to adjust the rack.
I will do that if you clean up your deadlift
I
plates.
will do that. And we'll check
Okay,
in
we'll see.
when
We'll
we
see.
have our next podcast segment. that we're
Mhm.
recording together, we'll check
Mhm.
in and we'll see if
Mhm.
I have cleaned up the plates on the deadlift.
I can tell you the answer to that, everybody. It's gonna be no, because
Okay.
she never,
Well,
ever, ever does it.
I'm putting it out publicly. If you leave the bars in the rack,
I will. Okay, that's
I will
fine.
clean up the deadlift.
Okay, we'll see.
Okay. All
We'll
right.
see.
So anyway, all this to say, we're going to talk about loading Tetris. So, and this is really again in like a home gym. But if you're in a commercial gym and it's not busy and you can like hoard your plates or you're loading two bars at the same time. So I don't like to put the plates away because I'm going to use them on my next lift. What?
No, no,
No,
no.
between lifts, John. We're not
Yeah.
talking about the last lift, okay? We're not talking about the last lift. So basically, like if I'm like, let's say I just did 80 kilos on the squat, and then I know that I'm gonna do like 30 kilos on a bench warm up or overhead press warm up. I'll just take those weights and put them on the overhead press. And then whatever plates I'm using or taking off, I won't take them off of the squat until I'm ready to use, like I'll just take them off and put them on the next lift versus like taking all the plates off and putting them on the floor, putting them away, and then using them on the next lift. So loading Tetris, I think, and I always kind of like, and this is something I do more with like my clients because they'll come in and do 3 lifts with me versus like I'll do 1 or 2 lifts. But with my clients, I'm always playing loading Tetris. Like those plates do not go away; they go to the next lift. So that's one thing that keeps it efficient. Like we said, having a home gym is like probably the most efficient thing ever. But that's not possible for everyone. Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, whatever you can. You really just need a barbell and some plates and a rack. Speaking of really just needing a barbell, plates, and a rack, bare bones
and
training. What?
and a
Sorry.
and a bench.
And a bench, right? But bare bones training. So not, and we're not just talking about like the program. We're talking about like John only uses a belt and shoes right now. And like, you know, back in the day, we had our knee sleeves and we had different shoes for every lift, and we had our wrist straps and our straps and our chalk and our this and our that and everything. I had 3 belts. I had one for squat, one for bench, one for deadlift, you know. And that could be the case for you in the past, but sometimes it takes an extra 5 minutes to put your knee sleeves and your shoes on. And then if you got to take your knee sleeves off to go to the next lift, just got to take your shoes off again and take your knee sleeves off. And if you don't have that time, don't worry about it. Don't use those things. They're not necessary. We can train without knee sleeves. We can train without wrist wraps. We can train barefoot. We can train in just one pair of shoes. Like you don't have to have a different shoe for every lift. You can, but you don't need to. So bare bones training is something that I have implemented. After GD, I implemented this like to the max. I basically like used a belt. I used no shoes. I used no knee sleeves. And I like didn't even use wrist wraps for. I don't even know if I used wrist wraps after GD, but also I wasn't benching as heavy, um but I don't think that I used, maybe I did like 2 years after he was born, but not in the beginning. And that's because the mental thought of taking that extra 5 minutes to put my knee sleeves on and tie my shoes and take them off between my lifts and change into another shoe, I was like, I don't have that time to train, so I won't train. And that held me back from training, so I removed the barrier to training, which is totally fine because your loads are going to adjust to what you can do. If you lift a little bit more with better shoes, if you lift a little bit more with your knee sleeves or your wrist straps, whatever, lighten the load. You're getting your training done, and that is all that matters, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I think we didn't really talk about all that much, but we both kind of like came to the same conclusion that
Mhm.
like all the extra gear and equipment, like it's great to be able to use that stuff, but it's really not a necessity. It's just something that you become accustomed to
Mhm.
over time. And it does add time to your sessions. I mean, obviously we're kind of like splitting hairs here. We're not talking about like it's not adding a half hour, but like sometimes 5 or 10 minutes is the difference between like being able to get your training sessions done. So, like you said, like getting knee sleeves on, certainly multiple pairs of shoes, like wearing different shoes for different lifts, you know, having to like take on and off wrist wraps in between like each set of presses, like that does add up. Like, so I did the same thing. I stopped wearing knee sleeves. I only, I used just my belt, same lifting shoes for all the lifts. Like I
Mhm.
didn't, swap out for deadlifts and things like that. And just basically minimized the amount of supportive equipment I was
Mhm.
using, and just simplifying like the different training variables to the degree that I could, just to make my training as efficient as it possibly could be from a time perspective, and your body does get adapted. Like I've
Well,
hit,
I'm going to interrupt because I just want to point out the difference between someone who deals with postpartum anxiety and depression and someone who doesn't. So, men or the father figure can get postpartum depression and anxiety. It's definitely a thing. And for someone who dealt with postpartum anxiety the first time around without realizing how bad it was until I had the second and I didn't have postpartum anxiety. Um, Literally that 5 minutes of like shoes and knee sleeves would cause me so much anxiety that I wouldn't train because I was like, I can't. And removing that barrier was the only way that I would get into the gym. So I know, John, for you, and this is just to highlight the difference between someone dealing with postpartum anxiety and someone not dealing with postpartum anxiety. For John, you're like, we're splitting hairs. But for me, it's like split the hair because that's my problem. So if you are dealing with postpartum anxiety, like figure out what that element of the training session is that is giving you the anxiety and remove it because it's not necessary. That's my TED talk. Sorry, I interrupted you. Was there anything
No,
else?
I mean, no, the only thing I was gonna say is like you are adaptable. Like when I first started
Mhm.
squatting without knee sleeves, like it felt terrible, because I'd been using knee sleeves for several years. And then after a few sessions, it was like, I had never worn them. You know what I mean? Like you just get
And
a, and same thing with wrist wraps. Like, and I've hit press PRs like without wrist wraps, you know what I mean? And
and the
stuff like
funny
that.
thing
So
is when I've put knee sleeves on since, I actually like don't like them. They make my
it
knees
feels,
they make my knees hurt. Which is funny because a lot of people use them like to reduce knee pain or to like
hmm
a help knee pain or whatever. And like for me, it's like, oh God, my knees don't feel so good after I start putting these on again. But that could just be because they're a little tighter because I weigh a little bit more and now they're a little tighter. So they're just compressing my knees instead of supporting and warming. But anyway, this was a better episode than the last.
yeah, just in case people listen to the last episode, Rory hated it.
I hated
And
it.
she said it was the worst episode of the podcast she's ever done.
No, and I'll
And
tell you why I
and she
hated
and
it.
she and she blamed it on me. So I
No, 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 no,
apologize.
no, I didn't
I
blame it on him.
apologize for
No,
my
I didn't
my
blame it on
poor my
you.
poor performance.
No, 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 no. I
I'll
will
try to
be
do better.
I'll be truthful and honest. I hated it because it highlighted elements of the journey that I'm going through postpartum, that barriers that I'm facing to training that are both modifiable and to some extent not modifiable. I did not talk a lot about the health issues that I have on the last episode. Um so I felt like the last episode made me look like I was just making up a bunch of like bullshit excuses to not train. And to some extent, there are excuses. Like I make excuses. I am very fucking tired. Excuse my language. I'm very tired all the time. But I also get horrible headaches. I just saw a neurologist last week, so I'm going to start treatments every other week for my migraines and my cervicogenic headaches. I deal with postpartum anxiety. Oh, I deal with anxiety in general. And it's now worse that I have two kids that I have to take care of. Like one was manageable. No kids was like my anxiety was like totally manageable, right? Um, One kid it was decently manageable, and now two it makes the anxiety like challenging. Um, And then I have a lot of excuses, but it makes it easier for me to succumb to excuses with my health issues, less sleep, um, not ideal nutrition, and that like it was listening to that episode, I was like, oh Jesus, Rory, you really got to get your shit together. Um, and here we're on, my baby's almost 1, so we're like getting there. But that's why that episode I didn't like it because it made me feel crappy. But so anyway, don't let yourself cry, Rory. Don't let yourself cry. We're okay.
Well, I mean, everybody, who's in similar situation, like, if we go back to talking about new parents, I mean, new parents do have legitimate barriers to training, and legitimate excuses. So I wouldn't let yourself feel, you know, like beat yourself up about it. I mean, it's a real thing. It's a life-changing experience that you go through, and
And I also think one of the differences between after JD and this time is my mom lives here now, and my mom is a whole other
yeah, it
element.
makes everything so much worse.
I have it's actually like having 3 kids. Um, so I am taking care of 3 kids and myself with all my health issues and managing a business. So, I just think that the last episode didn't really highlight all the challenges that I face, and it just sounded more like I was making a lot of excuses.
Mm.
So I didn't like that episode.
So it wasn't me then. It was
No,
you.
you
It
just
was
looked
you.
mad the whole time. No, it wasn't you. It was me. But
That was my serious professional face.
yeah. Maybe one day I'll share all the issues that I've got, but for today and for now, just know that there's a lot that goes on behind closed doors. Not between John and I. It's all me issues. And whatever.
Exactly. Like she said, it's all her issues.
John and I don't have issues. John and I don't have issues. We have a very healthy, strong relationship. So
other than the dishwasher and cleaning up her deadlift plates, we have very few issues.
okay, like John
No,
makes such a big deal about these types of things, but then if I'm like, why can't you just make the bed the way that I want you to make the bed? Because it doesn't freaking matter. But like, it doesn't matter about the plates and the dishwasher either. So why do I have to succumb to your rules for that, and you won't
they're
succumb to
not
my
rules.
rules?
So the deadlift thing is a courtesy thing. It's a
So is
courtesy
making the
because
bed.
no,
Why not?
because you tuck the sheets in and I feel trapped and suffocated in the tucked in sheets.
But our
When I
room
go
looks
when I go
so messy. You
when
can
I go
untuck the sheets.
when I
Our
go
room
to a
looks so messy, and
w-
you know that mess makes me feel overwhelmed.
the sheets have nothing to do with the room being messy.
No, they do. The room looks much nicer and neater and calmer and inviting and relaxing when the sheets and bed is made nicely. To me, it doesn't matter about you.
All right.
All right. So here we go. He's going to
Uh,
leave the bars. He's going to tuck the sheets in, and I'm going to put the deadlift away. All right. That's that.
we'll
If you
see.
would like to connect with us, you can find us on Instagram at John Petrizzo, JohnPetrizzo, and at Rory Megan. How do I spell my name? RORI_MEGA. Wait, no, Rory Megan _PRS. I don't even know. RORIMEGAN_PRS. You can join us in our face. Why are you making that face?
Okay.
You don't even know your Instagram handle, so why are you making a face at me?
Oh,
Join us in our.
you're an influencer and I'm not.
I'm not an influencer. I am not an influencer. Um, if no, I'm not. If I was, I'd have like way more followers.
All
Um,
right. You
join
got it.
us in
You
our
got it
Facebook
right.
group. See what? I
You
got it
got it
right.
right.
I got it
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Join us in our Facebook group, the Secret Society of Barbell Mastery. Free form checks. Ask your questions. Sometimes we do live Q&As in there. Trying to think. We have tons of resources on our website. We do have a lot of articles on training program modifications that you can make. So I'll link a couple of those in the show notes for you. We do have a free beginner program, and we are working on a free like new parent training program. It's not done yet, so unfortunately I can't link it right now, but if you're listening to this in a couple of months, it might be available in the show notes. But if you join our newsletter, which the link should also be in the show notes, we will send out that new parent training program to our newsletter as soon as it's ready. So if you get on our newsletter, you will have access to that immediately. And of course, we'll post it on social media and it'll be up on our website when it's ready. It encompasses all of the training strategies that we talked about in today's episode. With that all said, we thank you for joining us. Hope our little bickering didn't deter you. And we will see you next time. Bye for now.